Welcome to Heavy D Storytelling. How are you doing today? We are going to be reading a story. And I would like to show you something first. I got these, I think, 2 days ago. No, it was 3 days ago. So I got these Beyblades, and I really want to show you guys. So this is Super Hyperion and King Helios. And I'm super excited on if Hi, Becca. I'm super excited on what we are going to be reading today. Hi, Jessica. I dropped King Helios. First, we are going to be doing the Bible. Then we are going to be doing the synopsis. Then we are going to be doing then we're going to be doing Dragon Drums. We have 5 people on.
What?
Yeah.
Tell them what to do.
Hit the like button, subscribe, and hit the bell to never miss another video.
Yep.
Oh, they're hitting the like button.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
Hey, so seriously, we do have all those videos on YouTube, and I totally recommend. I upload them as soon as we're done doing this. Let's see. Hey, Jessica. Hi, Rebecca. Oh, you weren't saying hi to me. Okay. Hi, Kimberly and Warm, Granny Bear. Since you said cool, I'll just say warm. Yay. Okay, so we're going to be reading the book of Psalms. We finished chapter 10 yesterday, Psalm 10. So now we're going to be beginning with Psalm 11. And I will just go forth. To the choir master of David. In the Lord I take refuge. How can you say to my soul, flee like a bird to your mountain? For behold, the wicked bend the bow. They have fitted their arrows to the string, to shoot in the dark at the upright in heart. If the foundations are destroyed, what can the righteous do? The Lord is in his holy temple. The Lord's throne is in heaven. His eyes see, his eyelids test the children of men. The Lord tests the righteous, but his soul hates the wicked and the one who loves violence. Let him rain coals on the wicked. Fire and sulfur and a scorching wind shall be the portion of their cup. For the Lord is righteous. He loves righteous deeds. The upright shall behold his face. Psalm 12. To the choir master, according to the Sheminith, a psalm of David, which Sheminith is that musical term that I said I was going to look up and I didn't. So there it is. It is a musical term. Save, O Lord, for the godly one is gone, for the faithful have vanished from among the children of man. Everyone utters lies to his neighbor, with flattering lips and a double heart they speak. May the Lord cut off all flattering lips, the tongue that makes great boasts. Those who say, with our tongue we will prevail, our lips are with us, who is master over us? Because the poor are plundered, because the needy groan, I will now arise, says the Lord. I will place him in the safety for which he longs. The words of the Lord are pure words, like silver refined in the furnace of the ground, on the ground, purified 7 times. You, O Lord, will keep them. You will guard us from this generation forever. On every side the wicked prowl, as vileness is exalted among the children of man. Psalm 13. To the choir master, a psalm of David. How long, O Lord, Will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I take counsel in my soul and have sorrow in my heart all the day? How long shall my enemy be exalted over me? Consider and answer me, O Lord my God. Light up my eyes, lest I sleep the sleep of death, lest my enemy say, I have prevailed over him, lest my foes rejoice because I am shaken. But I have trusted in your steadfast love. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord, because he has dealt bountifully with me. And one more, Psalm 14, to the choir master of David. The fool says in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt. They do abominable deeds. There is none who does good. The Lord looks down from heaven on the children of man to see if there are any who understand, who seek after God. They have all turned aside. Together they have become corrupt. There is none who does good, not even one. Have they no knowledge, all the evildoers who eat up my people as they eat bread and do not call upon the Lord? There they are in great terror, for God is with the generation of the righteous. You would shame the plans of the poor, but the Lord is his refuge. Oh, that salvation for Israel would come out of Zion. When the Lord restores the fortunes of his people, let Jacob rejoice. Let Israel be glad. That's the end of Psalm chapter 14. There is a method. We'll read 3 tomorrow, and then 18 is kind of long. So I am trying to pace these so that we have about the same amount of time for each reading, even though some of these are kind of short, so that's why we read multiple ones in one day. I hope you're enjoying the reading of the book of Psalms, and here is Kimberly, who is ready for the synopsis.
The synopsis. And it's primer.
I know, JJ. I've been getting it right the past few days. He still thinks I can't remember names. So in the last two chapters, Primer, he's kind of been going undercover. He went over to the Gather, and he decided that he would pretend to be an apprentice chef, like
a cooking drudge.
Yeah, a cooking drudge. So he goes over and he does a bunch of work, and he goes into this guy, I forget his name, sorry again.
It's just a minor character.
Yeah, he goes into this guy's room, and he finds that this guy has a bunch of fire lizard eggs, and he has a bunch of green fire lizard eggs, which they're like not
grade A.
Yeah, they're really bad eggs. Like,
well, just not grade A.
yeah. Like, you know how you go to the store and when you get eggs, they're usually like grade A? It's like the bad version. Okay, so then what happened is he hides the egg in a warm place where they put the ashes, and he buried it in these ashes so that it'd stay warm while he was gone. And then later on he goes over to pick it up and tries to leave the hold, but they won't let him because, remember, he was like an apprentice, I forget what it's called, I'm sorry. He was pretending to be an apprentice. He was pretending to work in the kitchens and everything, and they're not allowed to go out. And he still looked like the kitchen boy. And then the guards wouldn't let him through, so he goes over to try to wait for people to come out, and then he realizes that people found out that he stole a fire lizard egg. Like, he stole the actual good one, the one good one there was. So then what he did was, after they left the courtyard area, he climbed through this window that led to the storehouse where there's only one person who has the key, so he's like, So if I go there, they're not going to check there because I'm pretty sure they will think that nobody's going to be able to get in there. So he goes in, closes the window behind him, and then he hears something. So he goes inside of a bag, and he opens the bag, he undoes the seam, then he closes the bag, crawls in through the seam that he opened up, and then sews it back together from the inside, and then he pretends he's a bag of, I forget what was in the bag, but I hope,
Fabric.
yeah, a bag of fabric.
And then
And-
he goes to sleep.
Yep, and now he's asleep.
Okay.
But there is one thing that you do need to know.
Only one
He-
thing.
He found when he was pretending to be, yes, you're right, Granny Bear, a gutter man. A gutting man. When he was pretending to be a gutting man, he found out that this hold had so much supplies that it would last them several, I think they call
Longer
it,
than a year. Like they wouldn't be able to use
Yeah.
it all in a year.
they wouldn't be able to use it in a whole year. And I don't know whether turns means months.
So what's the
Or
implication?
years.
What's the implication here?
Basically, they're hoarding stuff.
How
They
are
have-
how are they getting this stuff?
Trading partners
With
with the
old timers.
yeah, with the old timers. And so the thing is he's got to go over to the Harper Hall and tell the head Harper what's been going on over here. And this guy, he's been taking a bunch of stuff. It's almost like they're preparing for an apocalypse. Honestly,
Or a war. of
Yeah.
some kind. Okay. Cool. All right, and so we leave Pimer fast asleep in a sack with his probably queen fire lizard egg. Okay. He was roused briefly when the door was unlocked and thrown open, but the inspection was cursory since the hold steward kept insisting that the doors had been locked since that morning, and he wouldn't let them poke any spears lest they harm the contents of the bales. He could have hid in the glow room. He was sent there several times. The door was duly shut and locked. Pimer was conscious of more activity, but his sleep was so deep that he wasn't certain later whether he dreamed the noise or not. He wasn't even conscious of being moved or the cold of between. What woke him was a strange difficulty with breathing, a sense of heat, and the terror of suffocating in his own sweat. Gasping, he tore at the thread he had reworked, hard to undo with moist, trembling hands that had no strength, and with sight impeded by perspiration pouring down his forehead. Even when he had forced a small hole in the sack, he still couldn't seem to breathe. Weeping in terror, even to the point of forgetting the egg that had brought him to this extremity, he squirmed out of the sack to discover himself in a small space among other sacks. The heat was unbearable, but caution returned, and he listened for any sounds. Instead of noise, his senses reported sun-heated material and hides, sun-warmed metal, and the sour sweat of hot wine. Sweet of hot wine, my bad. Yeah. He tried to shove the nearest sack away from him and couldn't shift it. Feeling the contents, he realized that it was metal. Twisting around, he tested the sack above him and gave an experimental heave. It moved, and a whoosh of slightly cooler air rewarded his efforts. Dragging breath into his lungs, he waited until his heart stopped its frantic pounding, and then, belatedly remembering the egg, he felt the rags about the precious burden. It seemed to be whole, but he didn't have sufficient space to get it out and look. He gave another shove at the upper bale with no success. Angling so that his shoulders were against the unyielding metal, he levered his feet and pushed as hard as he could. It moved farther, and he saw a crack of sky so brilliantly blue that he gasped at the color. It was then that he realized he wasn't in Nabol Hold any longer. That the heat was not due to the unventilated stores room beyond Lord Marin's kitchen, but the sun pouring down from the southern skies. Once he was able to breathe, he's in the southern continent. Once he was able to breathe easily, Pimer became aware of other discomforts: parched mouth and throat, a stomach gnawing with emptiness, and a head that banged with a distressingly keen ache. He repositioned himself and shoved the sack a little further to one side. Then he had to rest, panting with the exertion of sweat trickled down inside his clothes. He had made enough space to take a look at the egg, and he fumbled under his tunic for it with trembling hands. It was warm to his touch, almost hot, and he worried that an egg could be overheated. What had Meneley said about the temperature required by hatching eggs? Surely beach sands under the sun were hotter than his body. He could see no fracture marks on the shell, and fancied he felt a faint throbbing, probably his own blood. He squinted at the blue sky, which meant freedom, and decided not to put the egg back in his tunic. If he held it in front of him, then it didn't matter how he twisted and squeezed his body past the sacks and bales. The egg would take no harm, and there was no way it could fall far. When he was breathing more easily, he gathered his body, egg-holding hand above his head, and began to squirm upwards. Just as he thought he was free, the sack behind him settled agonizingly on his left foot, and he had to put the egg down to free himself. Bruised, torn in muscle, skin, and nerve, Pimer slowly dragged himself out of the carelessly piled goods. He lay stretched flat, mindful that he might be visible. The unshielded sun baked his dehydrated and exhausted body as he listened beyond the pounding of his heart and the thudding of blood through his veins. But he heard only the distant sound of voices raised in laughing conversation. He could smell the salt in the air and the odd aroma of something sweet and perhaps overripe. His mind could not recall much of what he'd heard of the southern weir. Vague flashes of people saying you could pick fresh fruit right off the trees reassured him. A breeze fanned his face, bringing with it the smell of baking meats. Hunger asserted itself. He licked his dried, cracked lips and winced as the salt of his sweat settled painfully in the cuts. Cautiously, he raised his head and realized that he was at the top of a considerable mound that was braced against the stone walls of a structure of some height. To one side there was open space, to the other the crushed green of leaves and fronds, half trapped by the bales. He inched himself cautiously towards the foliage, the egg considered at each movement. But even with caution, his heart all but stopped with his motion, caused one of the bundles to settle abruptly with what seemed to him a lot of unnecessary noise. He listened intently for a long moment before continuing his crawl toward the foliage. Now, if he could climb up that tree, one look at the thorny bark decided him against that. His hands were sore, scratched and bleeding from past efforts. He was about to crawl down the mound instead when something orangey caught his eye. A round fruit slowly swayed just above his head. He licked his dry lips and swallowed painfully against the parched tissue of mouth and throat. It looked ripe. He reached out, scarcely believing his luck, and the fruit rind dented softly at his touch. Pimer did not remember picking the fruit. He did remember the incredibly delicious, wet, tangy taste of the orange-yellow meat as he tore juicy segments out of the rind and crammed them into his moisture-starved mouth. The juice stung his cracked lips, but it seemed to revive the rest of him. It was while he was licking his fingers clean of the last of the fruit that he noticed the change in the laughing and talking. The noise was coming nearer, and he could hear individual phrases. "If we don't get some of that stuff under a cover, it'll be ruined," said a tenor voice. "I can smell the wine, in fact, and that better be taken out of the sun or it will be undrinkable," said a second male voice with some urgency. "And if Marin's ignored my order for fabric this time," the woman's sharp alto left the threat unspoken. "I made it a condition of that last shipment of fire lizard eggs, Mardra, so don't worry." "Oh, I won't worry, but Marin will. Here, this one bears a weaver's seal. At the very bottom, too. Who piled this so carelessly?" Pimer, scurrying down the other side as fast as he could, felt the shiver as someone began tugging at the sacks in the front. Then he was sliding and grabbed the egg more tightly, exclaiming as he hit the ground with a thud. Immediately, 3 fire lizards, a bronze and 2 browns, appeared in the air about him. "I'm not here," he told them in a soundless whisper, gesturing urgently for them to go away. "You haven't seen me. I'm not here." He took to his heels, his knees wobbling uncertainly, but as he lurched down a faintly outlined path leading away from the voices and the goods, He thought so fiercely of the black nothingness of between that the fire lizards gave a shriek and disappeared. "Who's not here? What are you talking about?" The strident tones of the woman's voice followed Pimer as he careened away. When he could run no more for the stitch in his side and the lack of breath, he dared no more than pause until he'd gotten his wind. He did stop longer when he came to a stream, rinsed his mouth out with the tepid water, and then splashed it about his heated face and head. A noise, to his apprehensive mind, like the querying note of a fire lizard, set him off again. After nearly falling into the stream, he plunged on, tripped twice, curling his body each time as he fell to protect the egg, but the third time he fell, he had reached the end of his resources. He crawled out of the line of the faint path to a place well under broad leaves of a flowering bush, and probably slept even before his labored breathing quieted. So he's been, I guess they're trading all those goods for fire lizard eggs, and he's now on the southern continent, and nobody even knows where he is. I bet Siebel and Mentally are just like at their wits' end. Where is he?
Fire lizards, though.
Yeah, Chapter 7. Siebel had not really worried about Pimer throughout the gather day as he wandered or staggered about in his assumed role of wine-happy herdsman. And when word flashed through the crowds that Lord Merrin was to walk the gather, Siebel had no time to look for his apprentice. He had to concentrate on listening to the mutterings about Lord Merrin and his curious generosity with fire lizard eggs that only hatched greens. If Lord Merrin's appearance gave the lie to rumors that the man was dead or dying, it was apparent to Siebel's sharp eyes that the Lord Holder needed the support of the two men who walked beside him, arms linked in his. Some of his heirs, Siebel heard whispered in glum and disgusted tones. When the roasted beasts were being sliced for distribution to the gathered crowd, Siebel did begin to search for Pimer. Surely the boy wouldn't miss free meat at Lord Merrin's expense. Not that the beasts were juicy, probably the oldest creatures of the Hold herds, Siebel thought, endlessly chewing on his portion. He had placed himself at an end table about the gather square, where Pimer ought to be able to see him. By the time the dancing started, Siebel began to worry. Natan would be returning for them at full dark, and he didn't want to impose on the bronze dragon rider by requiring him to wait about or return at a later time. It was then that Siebel wondered if Pimer had somehow gotten into trouble, and maybe left the gather area. But if Pimer had gotten into trouble, surely he would have set up a howl for Siebel to rescue him. Perhaps he had only crawled away for a nap. He'd had an early rising, and he might not be completely recovered from his fall. Siebel sent Kimmy about the gather to see if she could locate the boy, but she returned, cheeping anxiously at her failure. He sent her then to the allotment, in case Pimer had gone there to wait. When that errand, too, was fruitless, Siebel appropriated a handy, fast-looking runner beast from the picket lines and made his way to their original meeting place on the off chance that Pimer had returned there to wait for him and Natan. Though Siebel searched the valley carefully, he found no trace of his young friend. He was forced to admit that something was indeed happening to Pimer. He couldn't imagine what, nor why Pimer, whoever the lad might have crossed, had not sent for him as Pimer's master. He sped back to the hold, retied his borrowed mount, and reached the gather just as news of the theft of the queen egg rippled through the crowds. Feelings were mixed as that news spread, anger from those who had received lesser eggs, and amusement that someone had outsmarted Lord Merrin. By the time Siebel got to the hold gates, no one was being allowed in or out. Glow baskets shone on empty courtyards, and every window of the hold was brilliant with light. Siebel watched with the rest of the curious gatherers while even the ash and refuse pits were searched. Wagers were being laid that somehow Kaljan, the miner, had managed to steal the egg. Siebel was there when the mine master was escorted by guard into the hold after the man's baggage was thoroughly searched. An order was circulated and additional guards posted to prevent anyone leaving the gather. Siebel positioned himself along the ramp parapet leading to the hold, where Pimer could easily spot him in the light from the hold's glows. Surely, if the boy had only fallen asleep, the noise would rouse him. It was only when word filtered through the crowd that some unknown drudge had made off with the precious egg that Siebel came to the startling conclusion that the drudge could have been Pimer. How the boy had managed to enter the guarded hold, Siebel couldn't figure out, but trust Pimer to find a way. Certainly, it was like the boy to steal a fire lizard egg given the opportunity. A queen egg at that. Pimer never did anything by halves. Siebel chuckled to himself and then sent Kimmy flying with the other agitated fire lizards to see if she could discover where Pimer was hiding. She returned and conveyed to Siebel that she couldn't get close to Pimer. It was too dark and too full. When Siebel questioned her for more details, she grew distressed and repeated the image of darkness and her inability to reach the boy. The frenzy of this search mounted. Guards were now dispatched on fast runners up every road leading from the hole to find any travelers journeying from the gather. Siebel sent Kimmy to the valley to warn Natan away in case the bronze rider was awaiting them. When Triss accompanied her back, Siebel knew that his warning had been timely. Triss chittered at him and then settled beside Kimmy, giving Siebel the opportunity to send the fire lizard to bring Natan, should he be needed. Both moons had risen by now, adding their soft light to the glows. But despite the fact that the guards endlessly searched and researched the hold many yards, their efforts proved vain. Delighted with Pimer's elusiveness, Siebel settled himself to wait out the night in the shadowy corner of the first cot below the ramp. He had a good view of the guards, and by carefully looking over the ramp wall, could see most of the courtyard. He was roused from a half-doze by the shouts and angry mutterings as the guards prodded those who had lingered about the gates back down towards the gather area. "Go on now," the guards kept saying. "Go to your cots and your allotments. You'll be allowed to leave in the morning. No need to linger here. Go on with you now." The moons had set, and gone too, were all the glow baskets that had illuminated the courtyards. Even the hold was in darkness, though some light seeped through the shutters of the Lord Holder's apartments on the first level. Curling himself into a tight ball in the shadows, Siebel hid his face and hands and ordered Kimmy to tell Triss to be quiet, and for both to keep their eyes closed. When the guards disappeared, he wondered what was happening. The hold was virtually unguarded as well as unlit. Was this some sort of trap to catch Pimer, or should Siebel take advantage of this opportunity and sneak into the hold? Kimmy rattled her wings in alarm, and through narrow slits her eyes gleamed yellow with worry. Triss, too, stirred nervously. Then Siebel picked up from Kimmy's mind the image of dragons, furthermore, dragons that neither fire lizard knew. Just as that image faded in his mind, Siebel heard the sound of dragon wings, gliding from the northern shadows of the hold cliff. He saw the black bulks of 4 dragons wing on wing. 2 settled neatly into the kitchen courtyard, while the other pair landed in the main yard. Siebel heard hushed commands, and then, as usual, muted hubbub. Grunts and muffled oaths punctuated the activity. Siebel was considering moving out of his protective shadows for a better view when he heard a heavy groan, the unmistakable scrabble of talons on stone, and the equally identifiable. I'm tired. Swoosh of mighty wings, making a powerful downstroke. In one hand, I'm gonna get a drink of water. In the one band of light in the kitchen courtyard, he saw the belly of a heavily laden bronze dragon struggling to rise, his sides bulging. No sooner had the first one cleared than the second dragon launched himself skyward. The 2 in the main courtyard moved to the kitchen yard. More activity ensued, conducted with hoarse whispers and low-voiced commands. All during this, Kimmy and Triss shivered, clinging to Siebel in a fashion they had never exhibited in the vicinity of other dragons. It took no great effort for Siebel to conclude that he had witnessed Lord Marin delivering goods to the old-timers from the southern weir. That queen fire lizard egg had probably been prepayment for whatever the dragons had lugged away. Siebel heard the sound of low voices coming from the direction of the gather, and he hastily nipped back to his dark corner, warning the 2 fire lizards to close their eyes as he hid his face and hands again. After moments of boot scuffling and muttered phrases, there was silence. Cautiously raising his head, he saw that the guards were back in position and that the glow baskets again glowed on ramp and hold position, and that the glow baskets again... I read the same sentence twice. glowed on ramp and hold walls, illuminating the roads leading up to the hold. He was trapped in his shadowy corner, nor did he dare to send Kimmy or Tris from him, for their flight would surely be noticed when there wasn't another fire lizard to be seen. With a sigh, he settled himself as comfortably as he could, Kimmy draped warmingly about his shoulders and Tris curled at his side. He couldn't have slept very long before he was rudely awakened by the boom of the message drums. "Urgent to the healer, Lord Merrin very ill, Master Harper required. Urgent, urgent, urgent." Had they then caught Pimer and, recognizing him, summoned Master Robinson to account for the misbehavior of one of his apprentices? Lord Merrin would like nothing better than to be able to humiliate Master Robinson, for any censor of the Master Harper would also touch the Bend and Weir leaders, whom Lord Merrin hated. Oh well, if that were the case, at least the boy had been found. Sibyl felt certain that Master Robinson could handle Lord Merrin's accusations, and yet, why was Master Aldive so urgently required? No hole drummed that measure unless the emergency was critical. The Hold's fire lizards had been awakened by the boom of the big message drums, and now wheeled about in the glow light. Sibyl unwrapped Kimmy's tail from his neck, and, holding her slender body in his hands, compelled her to look at him while he gave her directions to Meneley. He thought hard about clean clothes and imagined himself dressed in Harper blue. Kimmy chirruped understandingly, and after stroking his chin with her head, launched herself up. Tris chirped questioningly, tugging at Sibyl's sleeve. "I'm sorry, I have a headache, and it's making everything that much harder." Natan would be a good ally, but strictly speaking, the Fort Weir leader had no genuine business here, since Nabal was beholden to Tabor of the high reaches Weir. So Sibyl looked deeply into Tris's lightly whirling eyes, thought hard that Natan need not come to the valley, and sent the little brown back to his friend at Fort Weir. The message drum boomed a repeat, emphasizing again the urgency. Sibyl strained his ears for the relay of drums at the next point, but a handful of guards quick-stepped down the road towards the gather, and their passing masked the distant sounds. Dawn was just breaking when Sibyl, scanning the lightning skies, saw a dragon emerge. As the creature circled gracefully down, Sibyl was relieved to note the silhouettes of 4 riders. He was perplexed because the dragon's spiraling descent would not put the party in the Hold's courtyard, where logically they would be expected to land. Abruptly, Kimmy appeared in the air above him, chittering excitedly and darting off towards the gather meadow. Her mind pictured mentally when Sibyl did not move quickly enough to please her. She hovered at his shoulder and tugged at his dirty tunic, darting off again towards the meadow. "I understand, of course. I'm tired. That's why I'm slow, Kimmy," he said, sticking to the shadows. He skirted the cot and started down the deserted road until he was far enough away from the guards. Then he picked up his feet and ran down the deserted road towards the new arrivals. He reached them just as the blue dragon left. "Ah, Sibyl," said the Master Harper, for all the world as if he were welcoming his journeyman into his rooms at the Harper Hall instead of surreptitiously meeting on a dark meadow in early dawn. "Meneley, hand him his clothes. He can tell us what has been happening while he changes. Is Lord Merrin so desperately ill?" "Probably of temper, if nothing else," replied Sibyl, stripping off his tunic and getting a shower of dust and grit in his hair and face. "He walked to the gather last evening." "He what?" exclaimed Master Aldive, cocking his head up at Sibyl in surprise. "He had to, and then someone stole a fire lizard queen egg from the hearth of his bedroom." "No!" Laughter as well as amazement colored the Harper's exclamation. "Pimer?" asked Meneley at the same moment. "Is that why he isn't with you? Is that why I've been summoned to witness the punishment of a thieving apprentice?" Master Robinson was no longer amused. "I do know, Master. Kimmy located Pimer in the hold, but she couldn't explain where, and said she couldn't get to him because it was too dark. I know the guards spent hours searching the hold. Presumably they know it better than Pimer could, but—" Sibyl paused. "I'm bloody certain they would have made some sort of commotion if they had found him and recovered that egg. Nothing would give Lord Merrin more satisfaction than to force me to punish an apprentice thieving in his hold." "The message clearly states that Lord Merrin is ill," said Master Aldive. "If he was foolhardy enough to walk his gather and then agitate himself over the loss of a queen egg, he could indeed be very ill in his condition. It's accepted fact among the Nebelese, said Siebel, gratefully throwing aside his herdsman's cracked boots, which had rubbed his heels raw, that the man's dying. He glanced up at Oldive and saw the healer's head move affirmatively. Did you find out whom the Nebelese prefer as heir? Asked Master Robinson. A grand-nephew, Dector. A carter who runs a steady business between Nibble and Crom. He's got 4 sons that he keeps firmly in line. He's not a friendly man, but he's got the grudging respect of those who know him. Siebel had finished dressing and now gestured the group towards the hold. I have also discerned that there are more fire lizards in and about Nibble than there ought to be. Most of them, and he paused to give his words more weight, are green. Green? Mentally swung on him in surprise. Yes, green. You mean, Mentally went on, he's been distributing eggs from green fire lizard clutches? Why, the bloody beast! On top of that insult, a lot of the eggs don't hatch at all, so you can imagine how little his generosity endears Lord Marin to the recipients. Siebel added grimly, or of more importance, and Siebel held up his hand to forestall her angry words. Just after moonset, 4 dragons landed right in the courtyards and lifted off again so heavily laden you could hear their wings creaking. Siebel grinned at the expression of shock from his companions. Further, Kimmy didn't know those dragons, and their presence frightened her. That is the most interesting piece of news you've given me, remarked the Master Harper. He said no more because they had reached the foot of the ramp to the hold, and the group of men waiting there impatiently rushed down to meet them. Siebel recognized the hold's Harper, Candler, and the healer, Burdine. Of the other 3, he recognized the 2 men who had supported Lord Marin on his gather walk. The fatter man barged straight up to the Harper. Master Robinson, I am Hittet of the blood, and you simply must assist us. The situation must be clarified with all possible dispatch. As I'm sure Master Oldive will tell you, there is no time to be lost. The others exclaimed in support of his words. I fear that after the alarms and excitement of this night, the poor man cannot long survive. But come, we must hurry. Then he took the Harper by the arm and urged him towards the hold. Alarms and excitement? Ah, yes. You had a gather yesterday, Master Robinson was saying. I can't thank you enough for responding, Master Oldive, said Burdine, falling in step with the healer as the others followed Hittet and Master Robinson across the court. I know you said that there was nothing more you could do for Lord Marin, but the truth of the matter is that he has sadly taxed what strength was left him. I warned him, I did most explicitly, that he ought not walk the gather, but he was adamant. He had to reassure his holders. I think that would have been safe enough, but then he insisted on having guests in his apartments. So much excitement, and then to discover the queen egg had been stolen. Burdine fluttered his hands in distress. Oh my, I was beside myself trying to calm him. He wouldn't take that draught you left me for such an emergency. He became utterly uncontrollable when they couldn't find that wretched drudge who'd stolen the egg. Journeyman Burdine, said Hittet in chilling tones, whipping about to stare warningly at the healer. That interruption was timely made, for none of the Nebelese saw the look of relief that the Harpers exchanged. A drudge stealing an egg? Asked the Harper, as if he didn't believe his ears. Yes, if you must know, began Hittet, still glaring at the indiscreet healer. Lord Marin was recently given a clutch of fire lizard eggs, one of which was thought to be a queen egg. He naturally took the best care of such prizes, kept them in his own hearth. He has had a lot of experience with fire lizards, you see. He was to distribute the eggs to deserving people as the high point of the gather feast. When his rooms were being freshened, one of the kitchen drudges had the audacity to steal the queen egg. Now, or how we can't yet understand, but it's gone, and that wicked lad is somewhere in the hold. Hittet's tone augured ill for Pimer when he was found. None of the Nebelese noticed Beauty, Zare, and Kimmy peeling off from airy escort and darting out an open window as the group traversed the main hall. Siebel gave Menelie's hand a reassuring squeeze. She didn't look at him, but her lips curved slightly in a smile of relief. You can appreciate how upset Lord Marin was when the theft was discovered, and I fear this, and our pressing him to name an heir resulted in his collapse. Hittet was saying to Master Robinson, Collapse? Master Aldive looked sternly at Burdine, who immediately got his tongue twisted, trying to vindicate himself to his craft master. Master Aldive now brushed past Hitet and Master Robinson, and, with the still apologetic Burdine on his heels, ran up the steps with no regard to his physical handicap or dignity. Master Robinson also quickened his pace until the fat Hitet was forced to run to keep up. Siebel and Meneley deliberately slowed to give their fire lizards a chance to range through the hold and locate Pimer. "If you could know how good it is to see a friendly face," said Candler, quite willing to match their laggard advance to the Lord's apartments. "If anyone can make that dreadful man see reason, it's Master Robinson. Lord Merrin won't name an heir. That's why he collapsed, to avoid it. He was furious about the egg theft, to be sure, but while they were searching, he was more like himself, totally disagreeable, and planning all kinds of fiendish punishments when they caught the drudge. Frankly, Siebel, he wants the hold in contention. You know how he hates Bendon, and now," and Chandler laughed sourly, "none of the relatives who've been badgering him to name one of them wants to be the heir. I don't know why. They changed their tune abruptly this morning, just as well." Chandler snorted with disgust. Any one of the lot would create disorder in next to no time. "Changed their minds early this morning, did they?" said Siebel, grinning at Meneley. "Yes, and I can't figure out why. Every single one of them has done all he could to secure the nomination. Now, I'd heard that Decter was an honest man." "Decter?" Chandler swung toward Siebel in surprise. "Oh, the carter." He gave a mirthless laugh. "I suppose he could be considered an heir, couldn't he? Grand-nephew, isn't he? Forgot about him. Which is probably Dexter's doing. Said he could make more money carting than he could holding. He's probably right. How do you know about him?" "Looked up the naval bloodline." Beauty flitted back, skimming so close to Chandler that he ducked. Rocky, Zare, and Kimmy followed her, all chittering in some distress. All had the same message. Pimer was not in the hold. Siebel and Meneley exchanged glances. "Would he have hidden somewhere outside?" Meneley asked. Siebel gave a quick shake of his head. "Kimmy couldn't find him. Rocky and Beauty have been much closer to Pimer than Kimmy. Can't hurt to try." "Pimer?" asked Chandler, mystified by this cryptic exchange. "I've reason to believe that the theft was accomplished by Pimer," said Siebel. He and Meneley gave their fire lizards new instructions and watched them dart out the hold door. "Pimer? But I remember Pimer, the boy with the fine soprano. I didn't see him anywhere." Chandler broke off and pointed at Siebel. "You were there when Lord Merrin walked the gather, the very drunken herdsman. I thought there was something familiar about him. It was you. Well, and Pimer here too? On Harper business? I thought it odd for one of Merrin's drudges to have so much initiative. Well, I'll tell you one thing. Pimer is not in this hold." "How could you have gotten out? Or how could he have gotten out?" asked Siebel. "I was just beyond the ramp all night. Even if I didn't see him, Kimmy would have." They had reached the Lord's apartments now, and Chandler opened the door, gesturing them to precede him. "What's that smell?" asked Meneley softly, grimacing in distaste. "Smell? Oh, you get used to it. Disgusting, I know, but it has something to do with Lord Merrin's illness. We try to mask it." And Candler gestured to the sweet candles alight in containers about the room. "I often think that it's only justice," he added in a careful whisper, "for the suffering he's given others, but it's a terrible way to die." "I thought Master Aldive had given him," Siebel began. "Oh, he has, the strongest there is, according to Burdine, but the medicine only dulls the pain." The doors to the next two rooms were open, and the Harpers could see the clusters of men standing about in silence, all avoiding each other's gaze. Suddenly, in the third room, there was a brief flurry as the Harper appeared at the door to the Lord's private room. Siebel, Master Robinson's calm request carried clearly, and everyone turned to watch the journeyman hurry to his master's side. "Please send a drum message to Lords Oterel, Nessel, and Bargan, and to Rear Leader Tabor. Would they please attend us here at Nabol immediately? Double urgency on the beat, please." "Yes, sir," said Siebel with such unexpected vigor that Master Robinson gave him a mild second look. But Siebel turned on his heel and walked swiftly out of the apartments, motioning as he passed them for Candler and Meneley to come with him. "I don't know why I didn't think of it earlier, Meneley. If Pimer got out of the hold and is hiding somewhere in the hills, he'll surface to a drum message aimed at him. Lead us to your drum heights, Chandler." The big message drums needed only to be uncovered. Siebel stood for a moment, beaters poised over the taut hide as he composed his message. The opening roll boomed across the valley, the urgent measure following as the last echoes died. Then Siebel, eyes half closed in consternation, beat out the recipients' names, the Harper's request, and the urgent message once again to ensure immediate reply and attention. Mentally positioned herself at the window then, ears straining to catch the pass-along roll from the next drum heights. "There it is from the east," she told the two men. "What's wrong with the northern listeners? Still asleep? Ah, there they are." "Chandler, any chance of some food?" Siebel asked the hold Harper. "We'd best wait here for replies." "Yes, let's eat here where the air is clear," said Menely with a shudder as the thought of the thick, distasteful odor in Lord Maren's rooms. Of course. I apologize for not offering sooner." Chandler was away down the stairs. Siebel picked up the sticks again and beat a quick measure. "Apprentice, report, urgent." He waited a few breaths and then repeated the measure. "If he's anywhere between here and Rotha or Crom, he'll hear that," Siebel said, carefully replacing the drumsticks on their hooks before he joined Menely at the window. Her face was sad and her brows constricted in a tiny frown as she gazed across the huddle of cots below the cold hold ramp and over the disorganized gather square, still tenated by those unwillingly held over by the emergency. Few sounds wafted their ears at this height, and the scene was unrealistically calm. "Don't fret over Pimer, Menely," Siebel said, trying to sound more light-hearted than he felt. "He has a knack of landing on his feet." He smiled down at her, allowing himself the luxury of putting his arm lightly about her shoulders. "Except when the steps are greased." Menely's voice had an angry edge, and he gripped her shoulder reassuringly. "Look at it this way. Just see how that misadventure has worked to his advantage. He's got out of the drum heights and acquired himself a queen fire lizard egg. For all we know, he may meet us at the hold gates with it, smiling in that ingenious fashion of his, when you and I know he's as devious as Maren." "I wish I could believe you, Siebel," Menely said, sighing heavily. But she leaned trustingly against him for his comfort. If he was anywhere in the vicinity, Beauty and Rocky ought to have found him. "He's somewhere," replied Siebel firmly, and daring more than ever, he gave her a quick hug, turning abruptly from her as he caught her startled look. "The wretch!" he added, more of a growl than a comfort. At that moment, they both heard the message drum roll across the mountains, and Siebel hastily strode back to the drums. Chandler arrived just as Siebel beat receive for the last of the messages. The Nebel Harper was panting with the exertion of his climb, for he carried not only a well-laden tray, but a full wineskin slung over his shoulder. The three Harpers had time to make a leisurely meal before the first of the visitors arrived. The Harpers then escorted the Lord Holders and Tabor to the Master Harper. Siebel almost gagged and lost his breakfast when he brought Lords Holder, Nestle, and Bargain into Lord Maren's inner room. Menely was already there with Lord Oterel and Rear Leader Tabor. He saw her mouth working to control the revulsion she was obviously feeling. Only Chandler seemed impervious to the odor. Although Siebel had seen Lord Maren the day before, he was appalled by the change in the man propped up in the bed. The eyes were sunken, pain had lined his face deeply. His skin was a pale yellow, and his fingers, plucking nervously at the fur rug that covered him, were claws with hanging bags of flesh between the knuckles. It was as if, Siebel thought, all life was centered in those hands, feebly holding on to life through the hair of the fur. "So I'm granted my own private gather, is that it? Well, I've no welcome for any of you. Go away, I'm dying. That's what you all wished me to do these past turns. Leave me to it." "You've not named your successor," said Lord Oterel bluntly. "I'll die before I do." "I think we must persuade you to change your mind on that count," said the Master Harper in quiet, amiable tones. "How?" Lord Maren's snarl was smug in his self-assurance. "There is friendly persuasion. If you think I'll name a successor just to make things easy for you and those dregs at Bendon, think again." The force of that remark left the man gasping against his props, one hand feebly beckoning to Master Aldive, whose attention was on the Harper. "Or unfriendly persuasion," continued Master Robinson, as if Lord Maren hadn't spoken. "Ha! You can do nothing to a dying man, Master Robinson. You, healer, my medicine." Master Robinson lifted his arm, effectively barring Burdine from approaching the sick man. "That's precisely it, Lord Marin," said the harper in an implacable voice. "We can do nothing to a dying man." Sibyl heard Manolly's catch of breath as she understood what Master Robinson had in mind to force this issue with Lord Marin. Burdine started to protest, but was silenced by a growl from Lord Oterel. The healer turned appealingly to Master Aldive, whose eyes had never left the face of the harper. Although Sibyl had known how desperately Master Robinson wished for a peaceful succession in this hold, he had not appreciated the steel in the pacific master's will. Nabold hold must come into contention, not with every holder's younger sons eager and willing to fight to the death to secure even as ill-managed a hold as this. Such fighting could go on until no more challengers presented themselves. What little prosperity Nabold enjoyed would have been wasted in the meantime with no one holding the lands properly. "What do you mean?" Marin's voice rose to a shriek. "Master Aldive, attend me now!" Master Aldive turned, and the lord holders bowed. "I understand, my lords, that there are many seeking my aid in the hold gates. I will, of course, return when my presence is required here. Burdine, accompany me." When Lord Marin screamed for the two healers to halt, to attend him, Master Aldive took Burdine by the arm and firmly led him out, deaf to Marin's orders. As the door closed behind him, Marin ceased his entreaties and turned to the impassive faces that watched him. "You wouldn't. Can't you understand? I'm in pain, agony. Something inside is burning through my vitals. It won't stop until it's eaten me to a shell. I must have medicine. I must have it." "We must have the name of your successor." Lord Oterel's voice was pitiless. Master Robinson began to name the male relatives, his voice expressionless as he intoned the list. When he had completed it, he recited it again. "You've forgotten one, master," Sibyl said in a respectful tone. "Dector." "Dector?" The harper turned slightly toward Sibyl, his brows raised in surprise at being corrected. "Yes, sir, a grandnephew." "Oh!" The harper sounded surprised, at the same time dismissing the man with a flick of his fingers. He repeated the list to Lord Marin, now mouthing obscenities as he writhed on his bed. "Dector" was added as an afterthought. Then the harper paused, looking inquiringly at Lord Marin, who responded with another flow of invective, demanding Aldive's presence at the top of his voice. Again, the effort rendered him momentarily exhausted. He lay back, panting through his opened mouth, blinking to clear the sweat from his eyes. "You must name your successor," said Tabor, High Reach's weir-leader, and Marin's eyes rested on the man whose private grievance with him ran deepest. For it was Lord Marin's association with Tabor's weirwoman, Kylara, that had caused the death of both Kylara's queen dragon, Prideth, and Breck's Werenth. Sibyl watched Marin's eyes widen with growing horror as he finally realized that he would have no surcease from the pain of his body until he did name a successor, confronted as he was by the men who had excellent reason for hating him. Sibyl also noted that Tabor forgot to mention Dector. So did Lord Oterel when he took his turn. Lord Bargain recited the name first, with a glance at Oterel for his omission. Sibyl knew he would always remember the bizarre and macabre scene with horror as well as with a certain awful respect. He had long known that Master Robinson would use unexpected methods to maintain order throughout Pern, and to uphold the leadership of Venden Weir. But he had never expected such ruthlessness in the otherwise gentle and compassionate Robinson. He schooled his mind away from the stink and closeness of the room, from Marin's pain, by trying to appreciate the tactics that were being used as Lord Marin was deftly maneuvered into choosing the one man the others preferred among his heirs, by their seeming to forget Dector half the time. For a long while afterward, the flickering of glows would remind Sibyl and Manolly of those eerie hours while Lord Marin tried to resist the will of his inflexible peers. It was inevitable that Marin would capitulate. Sibyl thought he could almost feel the pulsing of pain through the man's body as he screamed out Dector's name, thinking he had chosen to displease the men who had so tormented him. The instant he spoke Dector's name, Master Aldive, who had gone no further than the next room, came to give the man relief. Perhaps it was a terrible cruelty to inflict on anyone, Master Aldive told the lords when they left Marin in a drugged stupor, But the ordeal has also hastened his end, which can only be a mercy. I don't think he can last another day. The other heirs, Hitet the most vocal, now barged in from the entry room, demanding to know why they had been excluded from their kinsman's presence, berating the lord holders and Master Robinson for his unconscionable delay, and finally remembering to ask if Lord Marin had indeed named an heir. When they were told of Dector, their reactions were compounds of relief, consternation, disappointment, and then incredulity. Sibyl extricated Menely from the knot of chattering relatives and guided her to the steps, down to the main hall and out of the hold where they could breathe the fresh, untainted air. A considerable and silent crowd lined the ramp, held back by the guards. At the sight of the two Harpers, they began to shout for news. Was Lord Marin dead? What was happening to bring Lord Holders and Weirleader to Nabol? As Sibyl raised his hands for silence, he and Menely scanned the faces, looking for Pimer in that crowd. When he had their attention, Sibyl told them that Lord Marin had named his successor. A curious rippling groan came from the crowd as if they expected the worst and were steeling themselves. So Sibyl grinned as he called out Dector's name. The multiple gasps of astonishment turned into a spat of relieved cheers. Sibyl then told the head guard to send for the honored man, and half the crowd followed the messengers of this mixed fortune. I don't see Pimer, said Menely in a low, anxious voice, her eyes continually scanning. Surely, with us here, he'd come forward. Yes, he would, and since he hasn't, Sibyl looked about the courtyard. I wonder. As he twisted slowly in a circle, he realized that there would have been no way for Pimer to climb out of the hold yards. Not even a fire lizard could claw its way up the cliff above the hold's windows, especially not in the dark and encumbered by a fragile fire lizard egg. His eyes were drawn by the ash and refuse pits, but he distinctly remembered their being vigorously spear-searched. His glance traveled upward and paused on the small window. Menely! He grabbed her by the hand and started pulling her towards the kitchen yard. Kimmy said it was dark. I wonder what's... In his excitement, Sibyl reversed back to the guard, hauling the complaining Menely with him. See that little window above the ash pit? He asked the guard excitedly. What does it open to? The kitchen? That one? Not but the store's room. And then the guard clamped his teeth shut, looking apprehensively back to the hold, as if he had been indiscreet and feared reprisal. His reaction told Sibyl exactly what he needed to know. The supplies for the southern rear were stored in that room, weren't they? The guard stared straight ahead of him, lips pressed firmly together, but the flush in his face was a giveaway. Laughing with relief, Sibyl half ran towards the kitchen yard, Menely eagerly following him. You think Pimer hid himself among the stuff for the old-timers? Menely asked. It's the only answer that suits the circumstances, Menely, said Sibyl. He halted right in front of the ash pit and pointed to the wall that separated the two pits. That wouldn't be too high a jump for an agile lad, would it? No, I wouldn't think so, and just like Pimer. But, Sibyl, that would mean he's in the southern rear. Yes, it would, wouldn't it? Said Sibyl, unutterably relieved that the mystery of Pimer's disappearance could be explained. Come on, we'll send a message to Torek to be on the lookout for that rascal. I think Kimmy knows Southern better than Beauty and Rocky. Let's send them all. Mine know Pimer best. Or, oh, just wait till I get my hands on that young man. Sibyl laughed at Menely's fierce expression. I told you he'd land on his feet. That's the end of Chapter 7. We did read the rest of Chapter 6 and Chapter 7 today. We will try to start Chapter 8 maybe Thursday, because Wednesday we have church and we don't get home anytime early. Okay, and with that, I will say good night.